Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, mgrahamsews. This video tutorial is for this beautiful crossbody bag called the Esme Crossbody Bag, and it's by Bagstock Designs. This bag is little, but it will hold everything you need. It's a great little bag for an evening bag, an everyday bag. So before we discuss some of the features of the bag, there was just a few things I wanted to go over. First, this video is filmed like a sew along, meaning there's no parts that are sped up or cut out. You sew this bag right along with me. So if any point during the tutorial you're finding it's boring or taking a little bit of time, you can fast forward the video or even watch it in a faster speed. The only time I will go off camera is when there's things that we sew that are doubles. But because I know this is a beginner bag and I know a lot of beginners are going to be watching this tutorial, I actually show everything on camera. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I don't give any measurements. I show no pattern pieces, no nothing, no rulers. I don't even give seam allowances. And that's because it's for the protection of the designer, but also due to the fact that I film during testing, and oftentimes things like a measurement for where maybe a snap goes might change. And if I give the measurement in the tutorial, that may confuse you because it'll be different than what's written in the pattern. So by omitting these measurements, there's no confusion and my tutorial is not affected by any changes that may be made. So let's discuss some of the features of the bag. First thing you'll notice is that there's this flap with the strip on the flap or stripe on the flap. When you open it up, it's closed with a magnetic snap. However, there are instructions for adding a twist lock if you prefer. You open it up, there's a magnetic snap that opens it up, and on the front we have this little slip-in pocket, perfect for your phone, and I'll just grab my phone here. It's perfect for your phone. So when you close the flap, your phone is there, it's easy, quick to access. Then you'll notice that there is a zipper closure, which you can omit the zipper closure here if you prefer not to have a zipper closure. When we open the bag, you'll see it's a small bag, but very roomy. You'll fit your wallet, your keys, your glasses, and any other essentials you need. There is a zipper pocket, great for keeping things that you don't want falling into the bottom of your bag. And on the other side, there's a slip pocket, which I chose to divide, so I have two slip pockets rather than one inside my bag. You also have, I'm just closing everything up here, a crossbody strap, but you can choose to make this a shoulder strap. And I do like crossbody straps because as I mentioned at the end of the tutorial, I like it because you have the choice to wear it as a crossbody strap or wear it as a shoulder bag. The choice is yours when you're using the bag. So again, this is the Esme Crossbody Bag. It's by Bagstock Designs. So let's get sewing our bag. So the very first thing you want to do is read through the entire pattern. This is very important because it not only familiarizes you with the construction of the bag, but also because designers often give information regarding different materials you're using and different interfacings. So sometimes if you're using a vinyl, faux leather, or a cork, you may need to cut your pieces out differently than you would if you were using a quilting cotton. So this is very important to note before you begin cutting out your pattern pieces. Once you've read through the pattern, you can begin cutting out your pattern pieces, and then once that's done, we can start with constructing our bag. Now the first thing you need to do is obviously fuse your interfacings. Now I've already gone ahead and done that, and there are some instructions in the pattern for how to fuse the interfacing, so you do want to follow those instructions. And as you'll see here, I've already got my interfacing, which is Decoville Light, fused to the back of my exterior flat piece. The other thing I like to do is mark what the flat piece is, so I mark it with the corresponding letter here right on my flap. There are labels in the pattern that you can use, and you can just clip them with one of your little wonder clips or your binder clips, whatever you use, to your pattern piece so that you can know what each pattern piece is. And I like doing that just because sometimes pattern pieces are cut a little bit similar in shape and size, so they can get a little bit confusing. So this just helps cut down on any of the confusion while you're sewing along. You know exactly which pattern piece to grab. The other thing I've gone ahead and done, and I'm just going to find a pattern piece here, is I've made some marks that are given in the pattern. So there's some marks for some measurements that you need to make for placement of hardware or placement of where your zippers and such go. So I've already gone ahead and done that, and you can do that too, and that's because I read through the entire pattern. I've also already pressed my flap stripe here. So I've already gone ahead and pressed that. I will need to go off camera and repress it because as you can see it came open when I piled everything on top here. And I've also gone ahead and gathered all my hardware. And I like to put it in a little baggie and keep it all together so I don't lose anything. And I've also marked what zipper is my main closure zipper, just so I know, so that I don't get confused. And everything that I need is in this little baggie, and I just keep it in here except for my rivets and anything that there's too many of. So rivets, I have a lot of them in my little container here. So I'm going to put this off to the side and we're going to start our bag. And the very first thing we're starting with is, just going to scroll through, attaching our twist lock or our magnetic snap. So I'm using a magnetic snap. You may be using a twist lock. You'll want to follow the instructions for installing the twist lock and also use your manufacturer's instructions for installing your hardware as well. But I'll just quickly show you how I install mine. So we're installing the male half of our magnetic snap here. And as I mentioned, I already made the mark for where this is going to be placed on the back of my exterior D piece. So then we'll take our washer and we line it up with that mark. I use the washer lines to draw the holes for the prongs. Then I use my seam ripper. Now I have a little trick that I like to show. If you're worried about cutting too far with your seam ripper, a way to prevent your seam ripper from going any further is place your pin right at the top of the first slit that you drew. So right at the top here. So here's the first slit, right in at the top, and come right out at the other side at the top of that second slit. So you can see it there, what I did. And what that'll do is this will act as a guard so you can't rip any further than where that needle is. See how it won't let me go any further? The pin is stopping me. It's acting like a guard. So that's just a little tip I like to give. Now that we have those holes, if you're using something like a quilting cotton or a canvas, you can use some fray stop or fray check on those slits. I'm using a vinyl here, so it won't fray, so I'm not concerned about that. So we have our little, I've inserted the prongs into the hole. Now I need a piece of interfacing, and this just adds some extra security. And you just saw I keep a little baggie of all my interfacing. I don't throw away any cutoffs of interfacing. I keep them all so that I can use them for the back of hardware. So I keep everything that I cut off. And this here, for this piece of interfacing, I'm not concerned about ripping it too far. So then you put your interfacing and then your washer, and then this is just my personal preference. I like to fold my prongs so they go in together and they hug the fabric. Just like that. And I'm just using my pliers that helps me grab the prongs better. So you'll see how it looks there. Trying to find the light, there you go. And then I use a piece of tape over top of the prongs. Not that piece. And then that just adds some extra, not only security to make sure that those prongs stay folded in, but it also helps prevent the prongs from rubbing against the other fabric that will be against the back side of this. So I'm just flattening the tape out, and that's how it looks when you've, I'm going to try to find it, see how it shimmers in the light there? That's how it looks when you have your male half of your snap or twist lock installed. Now we need to grab the lining D piece, so that's this piece, and we need to place them so they are right sides together. So pretty sides are touching. Line up the top edges. And another thing you can do, and it's often very helpful, is after you've cut out all your pattern pieces and you've fused your interfacing, you can write a T at the top like this. And this will just help you so that when we're going to put the pieces together, you know where the top is, and it won't get confusing for you, because again, sometimes pattern pieces, they're cut ever so slightly differently, where it's just that small amount that they look the same, so sometimes we end up orienting them the wrong direction. So this will just really make sure that you get them placed in the correct position. Now this one, it's easy to tell because the width and length are different, but there are some that are similar. So now we're going to take this to our machine and we're going to sew along this top edge using the seam allowance given in the pattern. And don't forget to backstitch at start and stop. Trim all your threads. Now we're going to turn this panel so that they are wrong sides together, and I'm just finger pressing this just to help press it open. And then I'm going to match up my bottom edges. I'm going to pin them, and then I'm going to pin my side edges. But first, I'm going to grab my turning tool and I'm going to push up that top edge there. Now, I can't press this with my iron because I used the vinyl. I could press from the wrong side, I guess, but, or on the lining side, sorry, not wrong side. So I'm putting clips all the way around to help hold this in place. So all my edges are now aligned. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to top stitch this top edge using the seam allowance given in the pattern, and then I'll baste these 3 edges together. So change your stitch length to your favorite length you like to use for top stitching. And then you can stitch the 3 sides together. My chair is rubbing on the table, it's making funny noises. And now I'm stuck. Then I'll cut all my threads. Now you may be wondering why I stopped and flipped it over and went from the other side when I did this last edge here. And that's because sometimes I find when I come around and I go back up this last edge, I end up getting shifting. So I like to, when I can, come down, flip around and come down the other side in the same direction that I did the first side. And that just helps prevent any shifting of the materials. So that's how that looks. I'm going to cut these little strays here of fabric, give it a little haircut. There we go. And that's how that looks when we have it all basted and top stitched. Whoops. Now what we need to do is take our pattern piece B, and this is called exterior, front, middle. Sorry, I haven't been giving you the names, just the letters. But we're going to take this piece and we're going to place it so that, or this piece, sorry, and place it so that it is pretty sides facing up. Then we're going to take this completed middle piece with our snap attached, and we're going to place it so that it is right sides up on top. So the lining side is going to be against the right side of B. Clip it together. So you're placing this slip pocket right sides up. So the lining is pretty sides against the B piece. And then we're going to baste these raw edges together the same way we did for this, excuse me, pocket. Excuse me. I was trying to hold that in. Sorry about that. So we're going to do the same thing we did with this slip pocket. We're going to stitch down each side across the bottom. So I'm going to go down the one side and across the bottom, then I'm going to flip over and come down the other side. And again, that's just to prevent the shifting. And your stitch length, because this is a basting stitch, can stay at the same length you use for your top stitching. Basting stitches just hold everything together, so we don't need to have our usual stitch length that we use to construct a bag. All right, so I'm at that bottom corner. I'm going to flip over and start again at the top, and I'm going to baste down this side. And again, this just helps prevent any shifting of fabric. Cut all my threads, and I used a dark thread so it's hard to see. Giving this a haircut too while I'm at it. All right, there we go. So that's how that looks. We have our little pocket all constructed. This is now going to be referred to as the exterior front middle. So we need to make note of that as we're going because it will be referred to. So now we're going to finish our exterior front. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the exterior front middle, sorry, I dropped my scissors, the exterior front middle, and we're going to place this so it is right sides up. So right now we're looking where we can see the snap, our male half of our snap. We're going to take the exterior front left, which is pattern piece A. It looks like this. So you want pattern piece A. And we're going to place it so that the straight edges on the left-hand side are matching. So place it together, pin at the bottom, and then one at the top. And then I like to pin the rest of the way. And then we will sew this with the seam allowance given in the pattern. And you do want to return your stitch length back to the length you use when you're constructing a bag. So don't forget to do that. Now what we're going to do is flip this and press it open. Now if you're using all quilting cotton for your entire pocket here, you can go ahead and take this to your iron. I am not, so I'm just finger pressing it, which is really all it needs. And it needs another haircut. And then we're going to top stitch along this A piece to help hold that pressed. So top stitch along that using the seam allowance given in the pattern and also your favorite stitch length. Trim your threads. And another thing before we move on, return your stitch length back to the length for constructing a bag so you don't forget. Now we're going to repeat that to attach exterior front right piece, so C. So again, place your slip pocket piece right sides up, place your C piece so it is pretty sides down, so pretty sides touching, so it is right sides down. I line up my bottom corners, and then I pin the rest of the way, and then I will sew this using the seam allowance given in the pattern. Trim my threads, which I didn't need to because it's caught on the other side. Press this open, and then favorite stitch length, top stitch this. There we go. thread here that I missed. And that is how it looks once you have it all constructed. Now what we need to do is fuse this interfacing that we have to the back of this completed front. And this is called the exterior front. So we need to fuse that interfacing to the back of the exterior front. So I'm just going to pause the camera. I'm going to go fuse my interfacing. You can fuse yours as well. And there are instructions for how far from the edges this interfacing will be. And then we'll come back and we will continue on. All right, so I have attached my interfacing to the back. Now I just wanted to make note is when you're fusing that interfacing, because you're going to have that half of that twist lock or magnetic snap there, it's going to be a little bit hard to press around here. And I try not to go near my magnetic snap where my iron is. So what I do is I just move my iron to each side. So say my hand is my iron, I just go on one side of where the lock is and then on the other side, and I do that all the way around. And so basically this area where the hardware isn't fused, and that's okay because everywhere else is fused in place. But there we go, our front exterior is complete. We can put that to the side. Next we need to grab our flap strip, so our flap pieces. And before you go on, there is a note that if you're using a magnetic snap instead of a twist lock, you want to install the other half of your snap now before you continue on. So you want to attach it to the lining side of your flap. So I'm going to install my other half of my magnetic snap now, the exact same way I did for the first piece on the exterior slip pocket. And if you really want, you can take a ruler and rotary cutter and you can cut this piece of interfacing square if you want. Oh, there it is. Just stuck to it. But I always just cut it. I'm not super concerned if it's perfectly square or not, as long as it's big enough. And then there's a measurement again in the pattern that we're going to use, and I accidentally made my measurement wrong and I went back and I had to check and I corrected it. It's a good thing I caught that before I did this. And again, I'm going to use my little trick. So you can see where my slits are. I'm going to go in at the top of the slit. And the reason why I go right in at the top is because that hole there is going to be covered and we cut up to that hole. So it's really important when you're using something like a cork or a vinyl or a faux leather, because you don't want to have extra holes everywhere. And you see my pin. And then that pin stops me from going any further. Oops. This is quilting cotton, so I'm going to use a bit of, that's coming out pretty fast. Free stop there. A little bit turned into a lot. Install the magnetic snap. Almost went right off the edge on that one. Pliers. There we go. And then the piece of tape. And I'm actually going to cut this tape so it's a little bit shaped like the flap. Oops. This way here. It won't get caught in the seams, and it's not perfectly cut, but that's okay, as long as it covers. I just don't want to be sewing and sew over tape, because this tape will gum up my needle. And there we have it. That's how the snap looks. So when we go to put our flap closed, let's just say our snap is attached, our flap is attached, that's how it looks. So if you're installing your magnetic snap, you'll do that now. If you're using the twist lock, you'll hold off and install it after the flap is complete. Now you have your flap strip here. This is piece H. So piece H, and you need to fold these long edges in, given the seam allowance, using the seam allowance given in the pattern. Once you have those folded in, you'll take this strip and you'll place it onto the right side of the exterior flap, centering it. So you're matching the top edges and you're centering it on the flap. So to center it, I'm going to fold this and make a crease. We need some double-sided tape. I'm going to fold my flap in half and make a crease so I can mark where the centers are of my flap. And yes, I did just use pencil, you weren't dreaming. Now, I'm going to use some double-sided tape to help hold it in place. And I'm also going to use some double-sided tape on the insides here of this, even though it was pressed, just to really make sure it stays down. See how the double-sided tape holds that in place nicely? And this tape seems to be harder for me to pull. All right, so now I'm going to add some of that double-sided tape to the back of these pieces. Or this piece, sorry, not pieces, there's only one. And this will just help hold it in place while I sew. Won't stop sticking to me. Remove the paper backing from your double-sided tape. And then we will place this centered onto the flap. So if you can't see, where your centers are, you can always draw them. Line up the center marks at the top and the bottom. And this is going to be tricky because I have tape that wants to stick to everything. So line up that top edge and the center mark. And you will have a bit of extra overhang on the bottom, but we'll trim that off after. And that's how that looks right now. So we have it on there, centered. So I've lined up my center marks. I just see some of these little frayed edges that I'm trying to get rid of. There we go. So that's how it looks centered. Now we're going to top stitch this all the way down. And if you want, you can take a ruler and measure and make sure that it is the same on both sides, which mine is perfectly even. So I've measured from the edge of the strip over to the edge of the flap. Now we're going to top stitch this down. Using your favorite top stitch length. And I can't see that one on the bottom, so I'll go back and do that after I trim it. So now I'm going to trim this overhang, and then I can stitch that bottom edge together. Oh. Actually, I don't really need to. It's going to be stitched together when we stitch the flaps together. So I'm just trimming all my threads. Return my stitch length. And that's how your flap looks with that stripe here in the center. Now we're going to take the lining flap and the exterior flap, and we're going to place them right sides together. Pin them together. So our flap is pinned together. Just making sure it's all lined up. There we go. Now we're going to sew down this one edge across this bottom curve and then back up the other side edge. And you'll use the seam allowance given in the pattern. Don't forget to backstitch at start and stop. Trim your threads. So now we're going to trim this seam allowance here, and I'm going to use my pinking shears. We're going to trim the seam allowance. And I'm using pinking shears because this will help the curves so that they'll poke out nicer. Turning tool. Turn the flap right sides out. Then I'm going to use my turning tool to really help get all the curves out nice. Look at how pretty that flap looks already. Now you need to take this to your iron and give it a press. I am going to go to my iron and press this just a little bit, and I'm going to press on the lining side because I can't touch the iron with the vinyl with an iron. So I'm going to press from the wrong side just to help get this nice and flat and crisp. And then I'll come back and we will top stitch around the whole flap and across this top edge too. So I've pressed the entire flap all the way around, and I also added these clips at the top just to help hold that so that it stays aligned. Now we're going to top stitch around the entire flap using the seam allowance given in the pattern. And if you have a hard time with curves and keeping a nice even seam allowance, what you can do when you get to that curve is put your needle down, lift your presser foot up, pivot your fabric a little bit, take one stitch, keep your needle down, lift your presser foot up, pivot your fabric, presser foot back down, and take another stitch. And you can do that all the way around those curves and on any curves on any bag, and that'll help you get a really nice curve there. Oops. I'm returning my stitch length now before I forget. Cutting all my threads. And that is how the flap looks when it's all top stitched. You can see it better from this side. It's all top stitched. Our magnetic snap is installed and our flap is completed. Now we need to grab our exterior back bottom F piece, and that's this one here, and we need to place it so that it is right sides up. Sorry, I'm just running over the cord for my microphone and I don't want it to cause any issues. So we're going to place that so that it is right sides up. Then we're going to place our flap so that it is right sides down. So the exterior side of the flap will be against the exterior right side of the back bottom. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to remark where the center is. So I need to find that again, because I want to line up those center marks so that my flap is centered on the back. It's hard to see the mark I'm making. All right. So again, exterior back bottom piece, and this is piece F, right sides up. Your flap will be right sides down, and we're matching these top straight edges and centered. Now what I'm going to do is I'll go off camera and I'll just measure from the edge of the flap to the edge of the back bottom and make sure that it's centered, because it's a little bit hard to see that mark, and I just want to make sure that this is perfectly centered. And if I have to make any adjustments, now is the time, which it looks like I do. It's just a small adjustment, but it's good to make sure that this is even. Perfect. So again, it's perfect, it's even all the way across. So I have it from the side edges here. I measured from this side edge over to the edge of the flap just to make sure it was even and centered. Now we're going to stitch this in place. So we're going to just baste it in place along this top edge, and I see a thread that I want to cut now because I don't want peekaboo threads later. So I'm going to baste that in place. And I'm just stitching right on top of that previous stitching that I made when I top stitched on top of the flap. When we stitched that opening closed at the top of the flap, I just stitched right on top of that. There we go. So right now that's how it looks. When we flip it up, you're going to be seeing both the right sides of the flap, and when you look at this side, you're seeing the wrong side of the flap, and you're seeing the lining side of the flap, sorry, and the wrong side with the interfacing on the bottom. Flip this back over. Now we need to grab our exterior back top E, and that's this piece here, and we need to place it so that it is right sides down. So basically it's going to be placed so that the pretty side of E, and it's also important to note where the top is of this. This is shaped so that it goes smaller at the top. So you want to make sure the edge that's smaller is at the top. So write a little T so you don't get confused, just like that. Or you can draw an arrow, whichever you prefer. That's your top. So that will be down. The bottom edge of exterior E will be lined up with the top edge of the back bottom. So you're placing this E piece right sides down. So again, this piece is like this. You're looking at the lining side of your flap. You have exterior E here. You're going to take it and place it so that the pretty side is down against the lining flap, but the top is here. You're lining up the bottom edge of E with the top edge of F. So the wider side of E is going to be lined up with the top of F. So just like that, so that when I flip this up, it's still got the correct shape. So again, my top is down here, and this is the edges that I lined up. So right now we have our flap sandwiched between F and E. Now we're going to sew this in place using the seam allowance given in the pattern. Go. So now when I flip this up, my top is back at the top where it should be, up here. So you see the T here with my arrow, it's back up at the top. So flip that up and then flip your flap up so that it's like this. So you'll see the flap seam and the exterior E piece is facing, the seam faces down. Press this, and then we're going to top stitch across this edge here on the bottom, what's this called again? Sorry, the exterior back bottom is where we're top stitching on piece F. And you're stitching through all that seams here. So the seam for where the flap and the exterior bottom is and exterior E, and you're top stitching there. So using your favorite top stitch length, top stitch all the way across that. Oh, it got sucked towards the back. Returning my stitch length. So you'll see here, I know it's hard to see because there's two sets of stitching, but right here is my top stitching line here. This second line is my top stitching line, and it went through all that bulk. And there's my top stitch right there. And so now when we have it flipped this way, we see the wrong side of the bottom and top, and we see the lining side of the flap, but when we flip it over, we see all the right sides, the exterior side. And you can envision the bag already. Pretty. So now we're going to place this to the side because we need to start our lining. And for our lining, we need our exterior or inner zipper pocket pieces. So you need J, K, and L. So here's K, L, and a J piece. So you need these 4 pieces. So these 4 pieces. So I'm going to place that to the side for now. With your K, this is your interior zipper pocket facing. There is a mark you need to make in the center. You need to make a little rectangle zipper opening cutout. So go ahead and use your ruler and make the marks for that. You'll see I already have mine drawn. Once you have that done, put it to the side. Then we're going to grab one of our interior zipper pocket pieces. And this is where we need one of our zippers. And that's why it's helpful that we've had them labeled. Now I didn't label this one because there's only 2 zippers. If there was more than 2, I would have labeled the zipper so I knew what zipper was where, but just having the main zipper labeled is enough because there's only one other zipper. Now, I did not put my zipper pull on yet, and the reason for that is I just find it's a little bit easier to sew the zippers to the pocket when the zipper pull is not on, because you get that little bump where the zipper is. I just find this is a lot easier for me. You can attach your zipper pull now and just zip it out of the way when you're stitching near it. I'm going to attach this after we have the zipper attached to these inner zipper pocket pieces, and I will show you how to do that. Excuse me for a minute, I just need to take a drink. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this zipper, so your inner zipper pocket zipper, we're going to place the interior zipper pocket L piece so that it's facing pretty sides up, and we'll place our zipper right sides up. So we're looking at the zipper teeth. Place it right sides up on top. Line up the edge of the zipper with the raw edge of L. Clip it in place, and then we're going to sew across that using the seam allowance given in the pattern. I just like not having the zipper pull there. I don't have to worry about shifting it out of the way. I can just sew right across, and it's easy to attach it after. So there's one side attached. Now we're going to just give this a quick little press. And we need to grab the other L piece and place it so it is right sides up. Then we're going to take the piece that has the zipper already attached, and we're going to place the zipper on top so that the zipper teeth are up. So the wrong side of the zipper is going against L. Make sure you have your edges of your zipper pocket lined up. So make sure those edges are lined up before you pin it all in place. You don't want them to be shifted over too much. There we go. So my edges are lined up. Now I'm going to sew that with the seam allowance again given in the pattern. Now I need my handy zipper helper, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to attach my zipper pull. And I do have a tutorial on my YouTube channel for how I use this. So the next step is to press the panels away from the zipper, so just like this. So I've done that already. You can go to your iron and do that. I'm going to install my zipper pull. I just open up the zipper. There we go, it's on. Now I have my zipper pull on, and it looks nice. Now I just want to make sure I'm going on the right thing. Put this to the side for now. We need to grab our lining L piece and some pins. And we're going to fold this in half to create a crease down the center, because we need to center this facing on the lining. But before we attach it, there's a mark you need to make from this top edge down, and that is given in the pattern, so you'll want to refer to that. Once you have that mark made, like I do here, you're going to take your facing and center it, as well as lining it up with that line you made. So the top edge of your facing will be lined up with that line. So it's centered. So I use those seams to line it up with the center. Now, another trick or tip, if you're using a material here, so say you're using, because you have an industrial machine that you're sewing this on, or your machine can handle it, and you're using a material that you don't want to have pinholes in, you can do what I did and pin it so it's in that rectangle box there, and then your pins won't leave holes in your fabric because we're cutting that centerpiece out, or cutting into it. So now we're going to sew around this entire box that we drew. Now, I'm going to take one extra stitch in the corner here just to make sure I don't get angled stitches. And all I'm doing is reducing my stitch length to 0. I take one stitch before I turn the corner. And here I don't need to do that because I'm back stitching. Now we need to cut this center out. So what I do, or what you do, is you're going to start with your seam ripper and get a hole started. Then with your scissors, you'll cut. Now you may have drawn the line as given it in the pattern, the instructions to draw the line in the center here. I don't, I just cut. I know where the center is. I just give it a rough guess. Eyeball it. Now be careful when you're cutting not to cut your stitches in the corner. However, if you do, which I've done on numerous occasions, don't panic. The quick, easy fix for that is go back with your sewing machine, start away from where you cut the hole. So say the hole was here in this top corner. Start back here, back stitch on top of your previous stitches, stitch along this edge, come down your corner and back down the bottom over here. So I'm just going to put this down. I don't want my hands in the way. So you're going to start back here, back stitch on top of the previous stitches, come along, stitch down the corner and down that short edge, and then back along the bottom and back stitch here. And what that does is it reinforces that corner again and all those stitches, and it prevents these stitches from coming undone on you. So now we need to take this to our iron and press it and turn it so that it is wrong sides together. So you're pushing it through, and I'm just going to kind of do this really quick. You're pushing it through so that it will look like that, the back side and the right side. So we need to take this to our iron and do that now. If you're having a hard time pressing it because of the materials you've used, you can use double-sided tape when you push it through to the wrong side. You can place some double-sided tape above here. So what I like to do is I like to place it on this seam, but half on the seam and half off so it catches on here. And then you press this up and it holds it in place for you. So I'm going to go to my iron, I'm going to press this, turn it and press it, and then I'll come back and we'll be able to sew in our zipper pocket. All right, so my pocket is pressed, or the pocket facing, and another little tip I'd like to share. So you can steam this and that'll help press it really nice and flat like mine is here. I don't use steam. I have a water bottle that I just use on spray mode, and I just spray it a little bit and then I press it with my iron until it's dry, and that helps get it really flat. Same thing as if you use steam. I just don't like using steam in my irons because I always worry about them leaking and stuff. So I always have a water bottle by so that I can spray things when I need to get out creases or I need something pressed really flat. Now we need to put our zipper pocket and our zipper inside this zipper opening. So some double-sided tape again. I'm going to place double-sided tape on top of the zipper. My tape scissors. Now you can have your zipper facing whichever way you want, your zipper pulls, so that the zipper closes whichever way, to the right or to the left. Depending on how you wear your bag or how you are, you may have a particular way you want your zipper to close when you're wearing the bag. Choice is yours. There's no right or wrong. Just need to get the backing of the paper off the double-sided tape. All right, so now we need to center this inside that opening on the lining here where the zipper opening is. So this is going to be facing so that the zipper is right sides up so I can see my zipper pull, and I'm going to place this so it is centered. And I'll know it's centered because my facing is the same size as my zipper pocket. Handy, isn't that? And you want the zipper centered. And you can adjust as you go. Just making sure everything is centered just like that. So it's all centered. Now what I'm going to do, just to make sure that my pocket doesn't shift on me while I'm sewing, because I've had that happen before. Pin it in place just like that. So I have it pinned down and I have this pinned at the top. Now we're going to sew around this zipper opening all the way around. Just want to make sure that I'm telling you to do right. Yes. So we're going to sew around this zipper opening using your seam allowance given in the pattern. Now, if you don't want back stitching, which I don't because I am using a darker thread, I'm not using pink, leave long thread tails and then start stitching. Don't back stitch. I almost back stitched as I'm telling you not to back stitch. So I'm where my zipper pull is, I'm just going to slide it out of the way. And sometimes because it's in the lining, I'm not super particular or picky about this. I will back stitch, but figure I can show you a little trick that maybe you haven't seen before. So I'm just moving my threads out of the way because I don't want to stitch over them. And then I'm coming back to where I started, and I want to stop in the hole that I started in, lift up my needle, pull long thread tails, and now we're going to pull these threads to the wrong side and tie them off. And what I do is I put them in pairs and then I just tie them off. I create a knot. And my hands are not wanting to cooperate today. And you can just knot it a few times just to really make sure. Be careful how tight you're pulling because you don't want thread to break. You can also add some fray stop, which will help. And I forgot this pours out really fast. It's not like the other one I had. It's a little bit slower. Remove your pins and your clips. We can look at this. So this is how it looks now. You'll see I have no back stitching at all, just a nice perfectly stitched pocket. That's the back. So now we're going to flip the top down. We're going to pin the sides. And you'll notice one of the edges is longer than the other. One at the bottom edge here is longer than one. We're just going to trim that so that they are even. And you could take this to your cutting mat and use your ruler and rotary cutter, but I'm just going to do this. Now we need to go to our iron and we need to press this so that it is pressed up like that. So the wrong side are going to be touching, and there's a measurement given in the pattern for how far you're going to press it. So go ahead, use your ruler, make that mark, press it with your iron, and then we'll come back and we will continue on. So I've pressed those bottom edges just as I mentioned we needed to do. So you see they're pressed to the wrong side given the measurement in the pattern, or using the measurement, sorry, given in the pattern. So that's how it looks. They're pressed to the wrong side. And this is going to be where we're going to turn our bag right sides out later. So having it pressed helps make that opening easier and nicer to close. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move our lining out of the way, and we're going to stitch down the sides of the pocket. And you're only stitching on top of the pocket. You're not stitching on your lining. So move the lining out of the way. And you're not stitching along the bottom. You're just stitching the sides. Again, keep that lining out of the way. Trimmed all my threads, and there we have it. We have a zipper pocket with the opening so that we can turn our bag right sides out through that when the bag is completed. We're going to place this to the side for now. We need to grab our interior slip pocket pieces. So there'll be 2 of them, and these are labeled M. So you're going to place one so it is right sides up, and the other one so it is right sides down. So the pretty sides are touching. Now this was cut from the lining, but I decided, because I wanted it to really stand out when you look into the bag, to use my exterior for one side of the pocket so that when it's against the pink you'll really see it, because this will sort of blend it in and you won't see the pocket, but I feel like this will really stand out when you look in the bag. So again, one is right sides up, the other one is right sides down. Pin it together. We're pinning along the top, and then we're going to stitch this together using the seam allowance given in the pattern. I'm going to finger press this open. I just crease it with my nail. And then I'm going to take this to my iron and I'm going to press this. I really want to make sure it's nice and crisp. So I'm going to go to my iron, give this a press, and then I'll come back and we will top stitch along the top edge and baste the edges together. So I've pressed it, and I've also pinned around the edges just to really help hold everything in place. Now I'm going to top stitch across that top edge, and then I'll baste around the sides and bottom. And for this, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to stop when I get to the middle, back stitch, break my stitches, and then flip this over come back up to the top and stitch all the way around. And again, this is just to help prevent any shifting. You don't have to do this if you don't want. It's just a personal preference. I'm just giving it a little haircut, trimming any threads as I go along. There we go. So that's how that looks. Now that we've basted and top stitched, now we need to grab our remaining lining piece and we're going to place it so it is right sides up, and then we're going to place this interior slip pocket right sides up on top. So the lining side of your slip pocket, if you're like me and you've chosen one that's going to stand out, will be against the lining side of the lining. So you're going to place it on top, clip it in place, and if you want, you can even fold it in half and make sure that the centers line up, and this is how you'll know it'll be perfect. Everything will line up perfectly. Then we're going to baste this in place. And I'm going to do the same thing I did where I go from halfway and stop to the halfway mark and stop, and then flip it over and go the other way, just to help prevent any shifting. And I'm stitching right on top of those previous stitches. Oops. All right, my hands are not wanting to cooperate today, apparently. So once you have that stitched in place, you can also divide the pocket if you want. You can sew up the center. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sew up the center. And what I'm going to do, instead of marking with a pen, I'm going to fold and crease it so I can see it. And I'm going to stitch right up that center. And this just gives you a divided center pocket, or a divided slip pocket, sorry. Make sure you backstitch really well at start and stop. There's going to be a lot of stress on this pocket, so you really want to make sure you backstitch. So now I have two pockets, two slip pockets. So if you're using the strap connectors as given in the pattern, you'll want to follow the manufacturer's instructions and install them on the ends using the measurements given in the pattern. I don't have those and I didn't have time to order them, so I'm not going to install those. Instead, I'm using the make your own connectors. So what you're going to do is mark a line down the length of the wrong side of the connector, and then we'll fold each edge in to meet that center line. So I don't have the center line because I know that the center is where my interfacing stops, so I can fold it right over the center, right over the interfacing, and then have my raw edges meet in the center. So I don't need to make that mark, but I am going to grab my double-sided tape again because I'm using a material that can't be pressed. If you are using a material that can be pressed, take this to your iron and press it. So double-sided tape along the edges. Do this on both. remove the paper backing, fold the one edge over, remove the paper backing again, fold the other edge over so they meet in the center, just like that. So you have that seam going down the center there, because that's where the raw edges meet. So again, fold it over, and now we're going to top stitch the long edges of these connectors. Trim your threads. Now we need to grab our hardware, and I'm using D-rings. You can use triangle rings or even rectangle rings if you want. I also need to switch my presser foot, so I'm going to do that now, because we need to sew as close to the hardware as we can. All right, so now we're going to take our hardware and we're going to slide our connector through the hardware. But before you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to fold the connector in half. So fold it in half and you're going to create a crease. Put that hardware back on. Then you're going to take the raw edge, the short raw edge, and fold it over to meet the crease. And you want the hardware to be in the middle of that fold, so where that crease is for that new fold. You can use double-sided tape here to help hold everything in place, which I will do. So again, fold your connector in half to create a crease. You can also draw the line if you want. Slide your hardware on and make sure that when you're folding it, the raw edge that you folded in, so those edges that you folded in to meet, are going to be tucked in, so you're not going to see them. You're folding it so that those edges meet. So again, connector slides on, fold the raw edge, the short raw edge down to meet that center line, and your connector will be in that crease. Fold the other edge over so that they meet in the middle, just like that. Repeat that for the second one. Again, my raw edges are going to be concealed in the center here, so it's all hidden. You're not going to see it. Fold the connector down. Oops, my hardware was sticking to my double-sided tape there. There's a piece of thread here that I got to get rid of. There we go. And that's how it looks. So I have it folded in the center here. So you can see it's folded in the center, and the hardware is in one of those creases, and it's at the top. So that conceals all the raw edges. Now we need to take this and we need to place these onto our gusset. And there's a measurement given in the pattern for where you're going to place these, and I haven't made that mark yet. I don't know why I didn't, but I haven't made that mark yet. So I'm going to go off camera. There's a measurement that you need to make from the top down, and then that's where we're going to place that connector. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to make that mark. I'm going to place my connector so it is at that mark and centered. I'm going to use some double-sided tape to help hold it in place. And then when I come back, we'll stitch all the way around. So I'm going to go off camera, I'm going to quickly do that, and then I will come back and we will continue on. All right, so I've got my connector attached. I just have it on there using double-sided tape, both edges. So now we're going to stitch all the way around this connector. So get as close as you can to the hardware without hitting it. And I like to back stitch at the top here. Now, when I'm coming down away from this, I can't really go forward because my presser foot is in the way. So I back stitch a couple of stitches and then I continue on. Just a little tip, I hope that helps some of you. Because sometimes when your presser foot is here, it'll jump over it and it'll skip stitches over that hardware. And that's really frustrating because then you have to stop and unpick stitches. And I'm just back stitching down here on the bottom. Now I will add a rivet. So it's always easier to go back up towards the hardware than to go away from the hardware. So there we go. Stitched that one on, and as I mentioned, I will add a rivet which will add extra security, but you can see how I've stitched it there. The rivet will add extra security to really help hold that in place. So I'm going to repeat that for this second side. Again, away from the hardware. And then stitch back up. And when I'm going back up and when I'm going down too, I'm actually stitching right on top of my previous top stitching. So right on top of that previous top stitching that you did on your connectors. I'm not super concerned about the back. If there's threads, they're just not very long, so they're not going to interfere with anything, but that's how that looks. I'm trying to get it, look at the camera on the computer so you could see. So you see how my connectors look? There we go, that's a good one. You see how it's all stitched on? Now I'm going to add some rivets. As it's given in the instructions, there's measurements given, and those rivets will add some extra security. Now, if you don't have rivets, you can use Chicago screws. If you don't have Chicago screws, what you can do is sew an X in this box here. So you can sew an X in this box. So either one, on both of them I mean, you'll sew an X in the box, and that'll help add extra security to the connector. Instead of adding the rivets. So again, you can just re-stitch over your box and then sew an X and sew over that X a couple times just to really help make sure that you've got that really stitched and it's really secure. And that's just an option if you don't have rivets or Chicago screws. So an X inside that box that you created here. So I'm going to go make the measurement, I'm going to add my rivets, then I will come back and we will continue on with constructing our bag. All right, so I've installed the rivets on the connectors on my gusset. So that's how they look when you install them. And Missy jumped up here while I was installing them. She wants to say hello, I guess. Okay. She usually doesn't stay for very long. So that's how it'll look when you've installed them. And again, if you don't have rivets or Chicago screws, you can sew that X inside this box and that'll help add that extra security like the rivets do. Now we're going to move on, and the next thing you need to do is mark your centers if you haven't already on your gussets and your front and back exterior. So I'm just going to make sure I've done that on all of mine. I didn't do it on this one. I've done it on this one. So I'm just going to mark all my front and back exteriors. Now, to do that, what you can do is just fold it in half like we did previously and mark where your crease is for your fold for the half mark. So you just fold it in half, and this one wasn't marked because we put this one together. Go in. Okay. And do the same for your lining as well. So get all the centers marked. And this one's marked. So once we have that all marked, next we're going to take our exterior and we're going to match the center points. So start with your exterior with the slip pocket, and we're going to match the center points with the gusset. So here's the front with the slip pocket, it's right sides up. The gusset goes right sides down, so they're pretty sides touching. Match up your center points first. So matching up all those center points first. You always want to start with that. And then match the top corners. Wow. That just exploded in my hand. Better pick that up before Missy finds it and plays with it. So when I'm pinning my top, I also like to pin at the top so that the raw edges align, and I'll show you what I mean. Like that, so that that stays straight. Now what we're going to do is continue pinning the rest of the way, or clipping. And we're going to put little snips in the curves just within the seam allowance. And what that does is it opens up the fabric so you get a nicer curve. So it opens up the fabric where the snips are, so you get a nicer curve. You don't get all the pleats or puckers. I use a lot of clips, if you've noticed, just to really make sure everything stays in place. All right, once you have that all clipped, you can then take your scissors and, as I was mentioning, make snips within the seam allowance. So don't go beyond the seam allowance in the curve. And as I mentioned, you'll notice that this will help open it up. And you'll even notice as you're snipping this, it'll start wanting to lay flatter instead of curving up or down. And when I'm snipping, because I do have a lot of clips, I just make my snips between the clips so that I don't have to remove my clips. But I'll show you I'll take 2 off and you'll see how it opens it up here. And that's what you want. It'll open it up so that as you're sewing around that curve, it'll help that fabric spread and open up and sew nicely. So I'm going to change my presser foot. Back to my Teflon foot here. And now that we have that all clipped and everything, now what we're going to do is sew down the side around that curve in the bottom edge, back up the other curve and other side. And you'll sew this using the seam allowance given in the pattern. And also make sure with that hardware that it's not in your way and you don't hit it. If yours is dangly, mine's not really dangly, but I just like to make sure that it's not in my way. And the nice thing about how our interfacing is cut is we're pretty much sewing, if you've cut it nicely, you're sewing right beside it. Take your time on those curves, make sure everything stays nice and flat. All right, so now we'll trim that side down just to help remove the bulk. And I usually like to check just before I move on to make sure that there's no puckers or anything like that. And there's not. Look at how beautiful that looks. Now, if there was a pucker or a pleat or anything that you're not really happy with, you should check before you trim really. But if you've already trimmed, that's still okay because there's still enough here to grab. But what you would do is where that pucker or pleat is, remove those stitches. So unpick the stitches in that area and go back just behind it a bit, then smooth it all out, add your clips, smooth it all out, then starting on top of your previous stitching, like I had mentioned with the, I'm trying to remember where I mentioned that, when we were sewing the zipper pocket. And remember I was saying if you accidentally cut your stitches, you can start back, stitch over your previous stitches and then go around and then stop and stitching over the previous stitches here. Same thing, you're locking in those stitches that you did previously, you're making the new stitches and you're coming all the way around, re-sewing where you opened up that hole and smoothed out that pucker, and then stopping here and you're back stitching again. And that'll just help get rid of that pleat. And I've done that many times myself because you turn it out and you're like, oh my goodness, there's a really huge pleat. And you don't want to keep it there. So I've done that myself many times. Excuse me. Sometimes depending on the material, you can't really see it and then you look and you don't see it, but then once your bag is done, you see it. But sometimes with the material, if it's a really busy print, you don't notice the pucker anyways, and then I'm just like, you're not seeing it unless you're really inspecting it, so I just leave it. So now we're going to do the same thing with our back. Pin it again. And you'll notice when I sewed with my gusset up and my exterior front against the bed of my machine. I personally just find that this is a lot easier to sew this way. It is mentioned in the pattern as well to sew this way. I just find it's easier because the gusset is what you're really wanting to make sure is nice and flat because your front and back are already flat already and you're trying to curve the gusset with it. So I just find it easier to do it that way. It makes a huge difference. all these lights. It's so hot here, and we're in the middle of September, and it's hot out, and then I have all these lights on me, and it's making it much more hotter, so my hands are getting a little bit slippery. I have a fan going, but it's not really helping. Can't complain too much. I don't want winter to come, so I'm quite okay with this weather, to be honest. So same thing, we'll snip into the seam allowances. And I do always find the second side seems to be a little bit tighter to add, and that's just because you already have one side attached. So it's not as easy to maneuver things. Cute little bag. All right, so snipping seam allowances. And we will sew this. And I try not to remove my clips until my presser foot's touching them. On the curves, that is. On the straight edges, I'm not super concerned, but the curves, I really want to make sure that it's held in place. So I try not to remove a clip until my presser foot is touching it. And you're going to notice that it might seem a little bit hard up at the top here to stitch up there. Just do what I did and move the flap over out of the way, and you'll be able to sew right up there and you won't have any issues. You can also use a zipper foot. That'll help you get nice and close without sewing over anything. I'm just going to feel. Sometimes I can tell by looking at it, but I don't think there's any pleats. Now I'm going to trim that seam allowance. This will also help those curves go out nicer, and it reduces all that bulk. Just be careful when you're doing that you don't snip any stitching. So I'm just going to turn this right sides out. we're done the bag, I will take my mini iron and I will go inside the bag after, and I'll press it from the inside to help get rid of any of the little creases that you can see in my vinyl. Because of the interfacing, it kind of creases it a bit. But look at how pretty that looks already. You can already see how the bag is going to look. It's beautiful. I really like the shape too, nice and wide. It'll hold your wallet and your keys. A small bag, but big bag, I want to say. Small but big, it'll hold everything you need. You could really make this into a really nice evening bag. Anyways, so there's the exterior all done. Now, you may have a twist lock that you still need to install here, but we'll do that after, or you'll do that after. Now we're going to repeat that for the lining. So the exact same process for the lining. Now, normally I would go off camera to do this, but because this is a beginner bag and people watching this may be beginners, I'm going to do this all again on camera. So again, my lining is right sides up. My lining gusset is right sides against the right side of the lining. I'm pinning the center, and then I'll pin the top corners. And then I'll pin at the top here, like I was saying, these top corners. And then I add that clip at the top here just to help hold it nice and straight. How did I not see that thread? And the exact same thing, we're just pinning all the way around, easing it in. We will do the snips as well. Now, another trick is to use a stapler. Some people like to do that. They like to use a stapler and they staple within the seam allowance so that it's not near the seam. So when they're sewing, they don't hit the staples, and then you remove the staples after. I'm not going to lie, that's a lot of extra work for me. I'm a bit, I guess, lazy. I don't want to spend extra time removing things. So I just do the clip and snip and sew. Another thing you could do is hand stitch your curves and then clip it all. So clip it all and then hand stitch those curves together so they don't shift on you. That's another option. Just be careful when you are making those snips though, to help the curves open up. You want to be careful that you don't want to snip those where you've stitched. And another thing too that I wanted to mention, if you're nervous about keeping your seam allowance even, another little trick, especially for beginners, and this was something I used to do when I started sewing and I found it really helped. You can use one of your Frixion pens or one of your fabric marking pens and draw your seam allowances onto your gusset, because that's what we're sewing on. So draw the seam allowance all the way around. And then when you're stitching, you stitch directly on top of that line you drew so that you're keeping that same seam allowance. I use a piece of tape on the bed of my machine here, and I line it up against the piece of the tape. I've just measured where that seam allowance is. I also have marks on my machine, so I know where the other marks are and what the measurements are. But that's just an option to help really make sure you're keeping an accurate and even seam allowance. Just a little tip. Now we're going to sew this one with the seam allowance given in the pattern. However, you want to make note of what the seam allowance is because it is a little bit different than the exterior. We start at one seam allowance and we veer to a different one. All right, so that side is done. I'm going to sew the second side and then I'll trim my seam allowances just to make sure that, or just to keep down on the time of stopping. And I'll go off camera to trim too. You don't need to sit and watch me do that. So again, clipping in the center, lining up those center marks. Everything is right sides together. Now just be careful when we're sewing this side because there is the dangly zipper pocket here, and sometimes they like to creep over to where you're stitching and go under your stitches. They're sneaky. So we'll continue clipping all the way around. All right, so I know it can be boring watching me do all this clipping, but you can definitely fast forward or speed up the video at any parts, as I was mentioning before, the beginning. Snips in the curves. There we go. And same thing we did with the first side. Now there's that zipper pocket, so I'm just going to move it out of the way. All right, now we're going to trim those seams. So I'm going to pause the camera, I'll go trim my seams, and then I'll come back and we will continue with making our main zipper closure. All right, so I've trimmed those seam allowances down, so now we have no bulk. The one thing I want to mention before we continue on is make sure your zipper pocket is open all the way, just so that you don't forget to open it when we go to put the bag together. So put that off to the side and leave that right sides out for now. Now we need to grab our zipper closure pieces. So you have 4 of them, and our main zipper closure zipper. And I don't have my zipper pull on yet. I'll do that after I'm done constructing these pieces here. So first we need to turn our zipper under at a 90-degree angle to create that stop at the beginning of the tape. So I'm using a continuous zipper tape. So what you're going to do is make the mark as given in the pattern. And once you have that mark made from your top edge down, you're going to pinch your zipper at that mark. So pinch it so it goes backwards onto itself, so the wrong sides touch. So you pinch it. And then where you've got that pinched edge, that folded edge, you're going to bring that and put that under those teeth that you folded back. So one more time. So here's your zipper tape. There's my line. I'm pinching it back onto itself. Then I hold where I've pinched, and this teeth that's back here, I bring them up so that it goes over that folded edge where I've pinched. Now I have a tutorial on my YouTube channel. I will link it in the description so that you can really watch me do that a little bit better. But that's how it looks once we have it done. So again, pinch at that line, fold the zipper tape back onto itself so the wrong sides touch. And then the teeth that you brought to the back when you pinched it back, you'll bring them up so they go over where you've pinched. And then that's what they look like on the front. And on the back, it looks like a little triangle or a mitered corner even when you do quilting. If you've done quilting, it reminds me of that. So now we're going to stitch this. And I always leave my needle in and I hand crank over where the needle is. So there's the first side. Trim the threads. And then another thing we're going to do is trim your zipper tape so that it is even with the sides of the zipper. So I'm just trimming it so it's even with the sides of the zipper. And that's how it looks when you've trimmed it so that it's even with the sides of the zipper tape. Now, I just want to make sure my camera will still be in focus. Now, you can backstitch over the edge here. I don't have my zipper tape on yet, or my zipper pull on yet. I'm waiting until after I stitch this to the zipper panels here, the main zipper closure panels. So I'm going to wait just like I did when I stitched the zipper pocket. But you can put, if you have your zipper pull on, you can stitch, so it creates like a stop here so that your zipper pull doesn't come off the end. Now we need to attach our zipper to our main zipper closure pieces. And in the pattern, there's a mark that you need to make from the ends of the lining over, and you'll want to do that on both ends. One is a start mark and one is a stop mark. So you'll see here, I've got them marked on these ones. I've already got it marked, and that's where your zipper will start. The one edge is where the zipper will start. So the folded edge of our zipper tape we'll place at the first mark, and you're placing your zipper. I'm so used to starting it with the exterior, I almost did it wrong. So we're placing it so that the lining is right sides up. And again, this is the piece without the interfacing, and as it says in the pattern. And that's why I keep saying the lining, because I don't want you to get confused. So you're going to place it right sides up, and your zipper is also going to be right sides up, and you're going to line up the edge of your zipper tape at that mark that you made, that start mark. Then you'll continue clipping the rest of the way. Now that stop mark that I made, I'm going to transfer it to my zipper tape so I know where to stop sewing. But I will also keep watching, because sometimes when I'm pinning, my zipper gets kind of ripply, and as I'm sewing it flattens it out, and then this mark moves a little bit. So I'm going to keep checking to make sure that it doesn't shift on me or anything. So starting at that mark, and I'm going to start with my needle down. That'll just help hold that zipper in place. And you're sewing using the seam allowance given in the pattern. And what's funny is mine didn't shift at all. Mine stayed perfect. Not funny, but as luck would have it, sometimes it shifts on me. So it looks just like that. So I've started and stopped at those marks that I've made, and your zipper, it may seem a little bit wonky if you're used to sewing the exterior right now, but just imagine that this is your exterior here now. You're going to be looking at the lining side underneath your zipper and the exterior on top. Now place this again so it's right sides up. Take one of your exteriors, and if you've done like me where you've sort of fussy cut them so that they line up when they're done, so I was just figuring that out. So now we're going to pin the exterior, and I'm pinning the bottom, the side corners here, just to make sure everything stays aligned. So it looks just like that right now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew, and I'm going to sew with my exterior up, and we're going to sew this using the seam allowance given in the pattern, and then again across the top using the seam allowance given in the pattern, and you're stopping where we stopped previously. So if it's easier for you, sew it with the lining side up, or what I'm going to do is transfer that mark, because I can see it, over to my lining or my exterior piece. And just be careful not to sew over your zipper teeth at the beginning. This one here, this half that we didn't stitch to anything, just be careful that you don't stitch over that, because it does kind of dangle in the way a little bit. So I just sort of move it out of the way. And I need to change my presser foot. I just realized I wanted to put my zipper foot on. Okay, let's start that again. And I backstitch when I turn a corner, just to really help ensure that that corner, when I go to poke it right sides out, doesn't have any holes or anything. Trim all my threads. Now what we're going to do here is trim this corner to reduce the bulk. So just like that, you trim the corner, and then we're going to turn it right sides out, and I'm just looking for my turning tool here. There it is. So just use your turning tool to turn it out. There's some threads I need to snip. Now you can take this to your iron and give it a press. However, I'm going to wait until I have the second side attached. That's just because it's less getting up and down for me. But before you do that, you have to take these edges that aren't finished and we have to press them under using the seam allowance given in the pattern. So you'll press them to the wrong side, just like I'm showing you here. Just like that. So that when we stitch this, we have no raw edges. So see how those two are folded in towards the wrong side, given the seam allowance, using the seam allowance given in the pattern. And I will clean that up a bit when I go to press it with my iron. But I'm going to clip this like that. So then we have this nice pressed edge here. There will be no raw edges showing anywhere. So we're going to repeat that for the second side. So again, grab your lining piece, place it so it is right sides up. Place your zipper on top so that it is right sides up, lining it up with that mark you made. And then I'm going to transfer that mark, the stop mark or start mark, because I'm going to be going this way. I think my pen's dying. Now we're going to, again, take the exterior, place it right sides together. Now you'll notice that I'm putting it so that the edge that doesn't have the interfacing is not against the zipper. You want this edge without the interfacing to be what's going to be sewn into the bag. It helps reduce the bulk in that area. All right, so we're going to repeat that same thing that we did with the first one, which was sew up the side. And you'll notice I moved this one that was completed right out of the way because it does get in the way. I don't want to sew over it. Same thing as we did last time, turn this right sides out. And now I'm going to take this to my iron and give it a really good press. I'm going to press everything flat, and I'm also going to press that edge that I was telling you about earlier under using the seam allowance given in the pattern. So I'll press them so that they go under, and we'll have no raw edges. We'll just have nice clean edges all the way. The only edge that will be raw is this long edge, but that'll be concealed later when we sew it into the bag. So I'm going to go do that, and then I'll come back and we will continue on. So I have it all pressed and I've pinned those long edges as well. Now we're going to top stitch this, and you could have top stitched it as you completed each edge, but like I said, I wanted to keep it so that I wouldn't have to get up, go to my iron once, then go back to my iron again later. Just less getting up and down for me. So now we're going to top stitch this. And another little tip too, if you want, you can use double-sided tape to help hold your edges as well. So you can use double-sided tape on the ends where we folded those under, and that'll help hold everything in place for you when you're sewing, rather than just using clips. So now I'm just basting across the bottom edge here. Trim any threads. Giving this a little haircut too. There we go. Now I'm going to attach my zipper pull. I need to grab my handy zipper helper. I put it away, but I need it again to attach the zipper. Pull onto my zipper tape. And there we go, my zipper pull is on. I'll back stitch over the end here, which also helps squeeze it together a little bit for me because I did it so fast. Next, we're going to attach this to our lining. So that's how it all looks. I've put my zipper pull on. Your zipper pull may have been on already. But now we're going to attach this to the main closure, to the lining, the main closure to the lining. So first we need to find the center of our main closure. So same thing as we've done before, just fold it in half. Mark the center. Now, if you're choosing not to do the main zipper closure, you can go ahead and skip this, but I am, so we're going to continue on. Now, I want my zipper to close in the same direction that it closes for the zipper pocket. So I know my zipper needs to close this way. So right now it's going towards the right when I look at it. So we're going to line up those center marks on the main zipper closure and our lining. Pin it in place. And we're lining up the raw edges. So right now I'm going to show you what I've done is the lining side of my main zipper closure is against the lining side of the lining. So see how it's lining sides touching the main zipper closure lining and the lining. So when I'm looking at it, I'm seeing the exterior right now, and we've lined up the top raw edges. So just like that. So it's lining against the lining, top raw edge is all lined up. Now we're going to baste this in using the seam allowance given in the pattern. Just make sure your zipper tail isn't in the way. You don't want to sew over that. And if you have a dangly zipper, like I do, make sure you hold it out of the way so you don't sew over it. We're going to repeat that for the second side. So there's my lining, and there's the inside of the lining of the bag. We're going to place them so that they are lining sides touching. Clip the center, and then clip the rest of the way, lining up those raw edges. And there we go, we have it attached. So you can imagine if your exterior was on the outside right now, you'd be looking at the exterior of your bag, and when you look down into it, there's the exterior of my zipper panel. Now, I cut my zipper panel different than what's given in the pattern. I did again use exterior and lining. You can do the same thing if you choose. I'm going to open my zipper all the way. Now I'm going to tuck my exterior into my lining. So exterior again is right sides out. Open up your flap, and I want to make sure when this is worn that it looks like this, because I like my bags to close towards the front when I'm wearing it, and I wear it on my left shoulder so it hangs on my right hip. So that's when I'm wearing it crossbody, sorry, but if it was a shoulder bag, then it's on my right again. So I want the zipper to close towards the front of the bag when I'm wearing it. So when I'm looking at it, it closes towards the right when I look at the front of the bag. Now this bag won't necessarily be for me, but that's just a preference. It's just sort of what I stick to. So now we're tucking the exterior right sides together inside the lining, and we're going to open up our lining, our seams, or you can nest them. Nest them means your lining seam goes to the left and your exterior seam goes to the right. So the seams go opposite directions. You can nest them, so clip them there. Get everything tucked in. Again, your exterior is right sides together with your lining. There's my chair making funny noises because the arm is rubbing on the table. Just want to see. I want them to go the same way, so whatever way I do the lining on the one side, I want to do that on the other side. Line up your center marks as well. Clip it all the way around. Also make sure any hardware you have attached to your bag is down, excuse me, into the bag, sorry. And then I'm going to take out my extension table, so I'll pause the camera because I know it can be a bit loud. So I'll pause the camera, I'll take out my extension table, and then I'll come back and we will sew this all together. Again, make sure that zipper pocket zipper is open. So mine is open. So you want to make sure that's open. So I'm going to get out my extension table and then I will come back and we will sew this together. If you can believe, we are almost done. So I'll grab the extension table and we'll finish this. All right, so I have my extension table. That just will help with keeping my bag flat, because when I'm sewing a bag like this, I find sometimes it falls and it pulls on me. So I like to use my extension table. So now we're going to sew this top edge that we pinned using the seam allowance given in the pattern. And I just want to see what the seam allowance is. So make sure you're using your stitch length that you like to use for constructing your bag. Now, if you're finding that your machine is struggling going through the bulk, you may want to try using a humper jumper. Increasing your stitch length a little bit will help. A walking foot can help. You can also, before you start sewing your bag together, hammer the fabrics to flatten the seams so that it flattens them and squishes them together, making it easier for your machine to get through. Another thing you can do is try using a bigger needle. That often helps too. So go up one size. It all depends on your machine. You know your machine the best and what it can handle and can't handle. But those are just some tips that I've used that I find really help when my machine struggles with bulk. I do try to always choose materials that I know my machines can handle. However, sometimes, you know, we can't judge how much bulk is going to be when we start sewing the bag. So it's nice to have some little tips and tricks. Also, with the interfacing cut smaller like it's been done in this bag, that helps reduce some of the bulk as well. So you're not worrying about sewing through interfacing either. You're just sewing through your materials that you've chosen to use. So there it is. The top of my bag is all stitched. You can trim that seam allowance down. I'm going to use my regular scissors. So trim that down. You can use your pinking shears there if you'd prefer. Now we're going to turn the bag right sides out through that zipper pocket that we have. And just be careful when you're pulling it out. Don't pull too much. I tend to push, so I reach my thumb in behind and I tend to push and I just sort of guide it out with my other hand. I don't want to pull because I don't want to pull on any stitches or break anything, so I'm just pushing it out, and that was actually pretty easy to get out. Tuck the lining down into the bag. I'm going to check everything here. And just want to see. So we're going to, before we, in the pattern, she does have us closing this opening and adding our zipper end first. However, I always like to top stitch first, just in case there's any issues as I'm top stitching. I still have that opening where I can go back and fix it. So I'm going to turn my bag. I know you're probably wondering what I'm doing, but I'm turning my bag so that the lining side is out. And the reason for this is I don't have a free arm on my machine, and I need to be able to stitch around my bag. So I'm going to turn it so that the lining side is out. This is what I do because I don't have a free arm on my machine. I turn my bag lining side out. I'm going to bring back my extension table, and I'm just rolling my seams here so that they're nice and flat. I've got my flap tucked down into the bag so that I don't stitch over it, and you can see that my zipper panels are pointing up, and I just want to make sure that I'm doing it the way it's given in the pattern. Yep. So now what I'm going to do is top stitch, and my foot is going to be inside the bag. So see how I'm putting this? So this is where my presser foot is. It's going inside my bag, and that way there, it makes it easier for me to top stitch because, as I said, I don't have that free arm, so I can't wrap this around the bed of my machine. And I always start on a seam in the back of the bag so that the top stitching is sort of hidden back there. So increase your stitch length. And every time I stop, I make sure my presser foot is, or my needle is down and my presser foot is down. I don't stop with that needle up. I always make sure it's down so it stays in position, because when you're pulling on your bag, you don't want to move your needle out of the way and then your top stitching becomes wonky. I hope that makes sense. And again, there is bulk here because of where the seams join here, where your lining and exterior seams meet. So if you're worried about sewing over that, again, all those tips I give a little bit ago will help. So you'll want to hammer if you're going to hammer before you start top stitching. There we go. I'm just trimming all my threads. You can even add some fray stop or fray check around where those threads are. So let's turn our bag back right sides out. And like I said, this is why I don't close the opening, because this is where I do a final check to make sure everything is good. And again, it will need to be pressed because it's, you know, been manipulated a lot. But that's how it's looking so far. It's so pretty. Make sure inside looks nice and I'm happy with it. Now, if your machine can handle bulk, you can always top stitch with these down, your zipper panels down, so that they're down like this, and that'll help them stay down when the bag is closed. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some clips on this, and then that'll help press it for me with the clips. I'll leave it on for a few hours, and that'll help press that in place so that it'll stay pointing down. It'll train it to go down. Even if you don't, it doesn't matter. You do have the flap, which will help it stay down. But if your machine, so if you're using an industrial or a different machine, and you know it can handle the bulk with that in that seam, when you're top stitching, you can top stitch with those down. I just left it up because I know that sometimes my machine can have little hissy fits, and I didn't want to have that while I was on camera. So now we need to pull this bottom of our pocket out, and we need to stitch this closed. I'm going to do this by machine. You can do this by hand stitching it with a slip stitch. stitch this closed. And I'm just stitching all the way across the bottom. Tuck that back into the pocket. Ow. And now we need to add our zipper end. So I'm going to grab that out and my tools for that. And some glue, and I'll show you how I do this. So I zip my zipper up, I fold the zipper so that it folds back onto itself, so it covers the back of the zipper. Use a clip to hold that in place. So my zipper end is shaped, and it has like a shaping on the front. I can't think of the word right now. So I just put a little bit of glue inside, and then I insert the zipper in. And the glue is really just there as extra security in case the screw falls out. You won't lose your zipper end. Now to find the screw that fits this screwdriver. Perfect. And then once I know that this is inserted as far as it can go, I screw in the screw. Just like that. And that's how that looks once you have it all screwed in. And you can even tuck the little tail down into your bag so that it's not hanging out. It's nice to have that extra little bit of hardware to show off though. So you can see my bag does need to be pressed. But that's how it's looking so far. Now we need to create our strap. And before we do create our strap, if you haven't already, you need to install your half of your female twist lock to your flap. And there are instructions in the pattern and measurements for where you're placing it. So you'll use your manufacturer's instructions and place it on your flap, and then you will have your twist lock installed. Whoops, keep hitting all my lights and everything. Now moving on to the strap. I'm doing a crossbody strap, and because I'm using a vinyl, I'm not concerned about the raw edges because I will be adding strap ends to my vinyl. However, you can also leave your vinyl raw edged because it's not going to fray. And I put away my tools for this. It's not going to fray because it's vinyl, it won't fray. So you can leave your edges raw, but if you're using a material like cotton, you will want to press your edges, the two short edges under as given in the pattern, just like that. So you'll press them. The other thing you need to do is draw a line down the entire length of the strap in the center like I've done. So once you have your edges pressed under, we can then take some double-sided tape. If you're using quilting cotton, you can just press this next step with your iron. So double-sided tape. And as I mentioned, I don't have my ends pressed under because I am going to put on my ends, my strap ends. But your ends will need to be pressed under. I usually do the mark down the center before I press the ends under. And then you can also use double-sided tape to help hold those pressed edges as well. Now, going to make sure that the tape is pressed down everywhere. It is properly adhered. We're going to remove some of the double-sided tape and fold the raw edge in to meet the center line. However, we don't want it touching the center line. You want to leave a little bit of a gap. And the reason for this is when we fold the strap in half again, that helps reduce the bulk in that area. You don't get all that bulk that's going to end up being there. It'll fold nicely. Just keep folding. So there's one side. Now we'll repeat that for the second side. Now if you're using cotton, as I was mentioning, you can take this to your iron and press it with your iron. So I just want you to see how I've left a little gap. See the little gap there? Hang on, you might see it this way better where the light is. You can see a little gap, and that's what you want. You want a small little gap between. Hit my light again. Something's not working here. There's not enough room on this table for me right now. There's that. Now we're going to fold this in half, concealing the raw edges in the center. And I'm going to use double-sided tape again just to hold it in place. And as I mentioned earlier, if this is boring for you, you can definitely skip ahead. I do know that there will be some beginners watching, and I want to have all the steps so that you can sew right along with me. And even if you're a beginner and this is boring for you, you can just skip ahead, get to the part you need, and then continue on. So now we're lining up the folded edges. And now we're going to top stitch both long edges of our strap. So you'll start at one end, come all the way down, stop stitching, and then start back at the end you started at and stitch down that end. And you can use clips here too to help hold it in place. So back stitching at start and stop. And I'm going to come back up to the other side where I started, back stitch, and then come down the second side. Trim my threads. And that is how your strap looks when it's all stitched together. Now what we need to do is install our hardware. So first, I'm going to open everything up. I need my glue. So we have our swivel hook and our slider and our strap ends. So I'm going to install my strap ends now. And it's same as we did for the zipper end. So a little bit of glue inside. Screw them in, and you'll notice I don't hold what I'm working on in my hand. I keep it pressed against the table, and that's just in case my screwdriver slips, I don't end up stabbing myself accidentally. So there's one end. I want to make sure the other end is installed in the same direction, meaning that the right side is on the right side. So one of these strap ends won't be backwards. So lining side is with the end of the strap end that has the screws in it. So I'm just going to place that flat. And there we are. And you can use these on cotton straps too. They work on cotton straps. However, I would still fold your ends under. That adds a bit of bulk because cotton is a little bit thinner. It'll add a bit of bulk here at the end where you're attaching this strap end, making it fit a little bit more snug. All right, now we've got to attach our slider. So we're going to slide the one short end of the strap into our slider. And if you have a slider like mine with the loose middle bar, I let it drop to the bottom. So I slide my strap in, then I push the bar against the strap, and I slide the strap over the bar. So that middle bar ends up being in between my strap. We'll fold that, clip it in place. Now, I'm going to use rivets. However, you can sew this here if you're not using rivets. You can sew it, make a box, and then sew an X in it for extra security. And you'll also notice when I put that over the bar, I put it so that the screws face in against the strap so they're not facing out, you don't see them. Slide a slider on, so with your strap so that your end with your slider, the slider is facing against the end of the table. I'm looking at the wrong side of the strap, so what would be the inside of the strap. Leaving it flat so that I know what side is the lining and what side is the top. My swivel hook, I place it so the hook is against the table. I slide my slider or my strap onto the end of the swivel hook. And I bring my strap all the way back up and I slide it through my swivel hook, through my slider, back down through the slider, same as we did in the beginning. So now we have something that looks like this. So it looks like that. And then again, we're going to have this so that the slider is against the table. See how that looks? This is how my slider is against the table. I don't see my slider. Again, swivel hook against the table, slide the end of the strap into the swivel hook's hardware. I'm going to clip it in place, and then you can choose to sew this, or you can use rivets or Chicago screws. I'm going to use rivets, so I'm going to go off camera to install my rivets. There's a bit of glue on my table here. To install my rivets, and then I'll come back and we will finish up and look at our bags, and that's it. So I'll be right back. All right, so I've installed the rivets onto my strap. So you can see here, here's a rivet here and the rivet on this half. So now the strap is complete. We just need to attach it to our bag. And the reason why I like making a crossbody strap is you'll notice when it's tightened, it makes it a shorter strap. So you can wear this as a shoulder bag and you can adjust to how you want it to hang on your shoulder. So if you want it to hang a little longer or a little higher up, you can adjust it. And that's why I like crossbody straps, because you have that option to wear crossbody, but also as a shoulder bag. So there's our Esme Crossbody Bag all completed. I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me and maybe picked up a few tips and tricks along the way. Before you go out and show your bag off to the world, don't forget to take lots of photos and post them on social media using the hashtags given in the pattern. Thank you for sewing with me. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.